Julian and I have been best friends since our first week of college. The kind of friendship that survives moves, breakups, and long stretches of barely talking, because you both understand, without ever needing to say it, that it'll still be there when you finally pick the phone back up. We've been each other's readers for over a decade by that point. The person you send a rough draft to at 2 in the morning because you trust them to tell you honestly whether it works, long before either of us had published anything that mattered. Julian had always been, in my mind, the more talented one between us, the one whose early short stories got real attention, the one everyone in our writing group in our 20s assumed would break out first. So when his marriage fell apart and his writing career stalled at almost exactly the same time, 2 years of rejected manuscripts, an agent who'd quietly stopped returning his emails, a divorce that took most of what confidence he had left with it, I did the thing I genuinely believed at the time any real friend would do. I wrote the novel he couldn't finish. I remember the specific low point that preceded it, a phone call where he told me, in a voice I'd never heard from him before, flat and defeated in a way that scared me more than anything he actually said, that he was starting to think the version of himself who used to write anything worth reading simply wasn't coming back. I want to explain how that actually happened, because I think it matters to understanding why I never once thought to protect myself with paperwork. Julian had a premise, a genuinely good one, a literary thriller about a man discovering his late father had lived an entire second identity, and about 60 scattered, unfinished pages he'd been unable to make himself return to for over a year. He mentioned it to me one night, drunk and honest in the specific way you only are with someone who's known you for 15 years, and said, almost as a joke, that he didn't think he had it in him anymore to finish it. I offered, also half as a joke at first, to take a pass at the next few chapters just to get him unstuck, mostly, if I'm honest, because I wanted to give him something to feel hopeful about again more than I wanted anything for myself. I ended up writing the entire rest of the book. All of it, every chapter after that first 60 pages, over the following 8 months, working most weeknights after my actual job, sending him chapters as I finished them, incorporating his notes, shaping the ending around a twist I came up with myself when his original outline fell apart under its own weight 2/3 of the way through. I remember those 8 months fondly, actually before I understood what they'd eventually cost me, the specific satisfaction of finally cracking a scene that wasn't working, texting him at midnight to talk through a plot problem, the two of us slowly rebuilding something like his old confidence one chapter at a time, watching him start to sound, on our calls, a little more like the friend I remembered from our 20s instead of the flattened, defeated voice from that phone call months earlier. We had exactly one conversation about what this arrangement actually meant, sitting in his kitchen the week I agreed to take it on. He said, and I remember this almost word for word because I've replayed it so many times since, if this ever actually sells, we split it. Whatever happens, we split it. And everyone knows you did the real work getting it across the finish line. We shook hands on it. I didn't ask for anything in writing, because asking your best friend of 15 years to sign a contract, in that particular moment, in his kitchen, weeks after his divorce was finalized, felt like an insult neither of us was prepared to survive. The book sold 11 months later, to real, significant interest from 3 different publishers, for an advance that was, by the modest standards of literary fiction, genuinely substantial. I remember exactly where I was when he called to tell me, in my car in a grocery store parking lot, and I remember pulling over because I was laughing too hard to keep driving safely, genuinely, uncomplicatedly thrilled for him in a way I don't think I've felt about anything of my own since. It came out 14 months after that, and it did something neither of us had remotely prepared for. It sold, not modestly, significantly, unpredictably, the kind of word-of-mouth literary success publishers can't actually manufacture no matter how hard they try. Within a year, there was a film option with a recognizable director attached. Julian did interviews. Actual profiles ran in actual magazines, describing him, more than once, as a raw new voice exploring inherited secrets and reinvention. Language that, reading it for the first time, made me laugh out loud alone in my apartment, because I had written almost every sentence those interviewers were praising him for. I want to be honest about the first several months of his success, because I didn't feel betrayed yet. I felt genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy for him, the way you do for someone you love who's finally caught a break after watching him struggle for years. I helped him prep for a few early interviews, actually workshopping answers to questions about the book's themes over the phone, still operating entirely on the assumption that our kitchen table handshake meant exactly what it had sounded like it meant. I remember feeling, during those months, a genuine pride watching him step back into a version of himself he'd seemed to have lost for good. More confident on calls, joking again the way he used to before the divorce, and I told myself, more than once, that whatever came of the money eventually, I was just glad to have him back. The shift happened gradually enough that I can't point to one single moment it started, though I can point to the moment I finally, fully understood it. Julian got harder to reach. Calls that used to get returned within a day started taking a week, then two. Texts got shorter, friendlier on the surface, but noticeably emptier, the specific kind of message someone sends when they're managing a relationship rather than actually present in it. When I finally asked him, carefully, almost apologetically, about the money, not even all of it, just some reasonable acknowledgement of the arrangement we'd shaken hands on, he told me, in a tone I'd genuinely never heard him use with me before, that he appreciated my help brainstorming and that he was going through a lot right now, and that we could talk about it once things calmed down. Things did not calm down. Over the following 6 months, once things calmed down quietly, permanently disappeared from every conversation, replaced eventually by no conversations at all. The moment I fully understood what had happened was reading a profile of him in a literary magazine, 10 months after the book came out, in which he described the entire writing process in detail. The long nights, the emotional excavation of writing about a father's secret life so soon after his own divorce, a process he described, at length, in the first-person singular, with no mention whatsoever of a collaborator, a friend, an editor, or anyone else who'd touched a single page of it. I read that profile 3 times, sitting very still at my own kitchen table, feeling something colder and more specific than simple hurt settle into my chest. It wasn't just that he hadn't thanked me. It was that he'd built, in careful, quotable sentences, an entire creation myth for the book that had no structural room left in it for a second person to have ever existed. I confronted him once, directly, over the phone, about 6 weeks after that article ran. It was a short, ugly conversation, and I remember my hands shaking slightly the entire time I dialed, rehearsing an opening line I never actually got to use because he answered already sounding defensive, as though he'd been expecting the call for weeks. He told me, plainly, that he'd shaped every sentence into his own voice through revision, that my early drafts were useful scaffolding rather than the actual finished text, and that legally and, in his own words, honestly, the book was his. He reminded me, in a sentence I still can't fully believe he said out loud in my face, that we'd never signed anything, and that friendships get messy when people start treating favors like invoices. I told him, before I hung up, that I still had every draft. He went quiet for a second, and then said, "Do what you have to do," in a voice that sounded, for the first time in that entire call, almost relieved to finally have it out in the open. It was the last real conversation we've had. I want to tell you what I did next, because I think it's the part of this story that actually matters more than the betrayal itself. I did not have a contract. What I did have, it turned out once I sat down and actually cataloged it instead of just feeling sick about it, was something almost as good, built entirely by accident out of 8 months of ordinary, unglamorous work. I spent an entire weekend, early on, simply going through every folder on my old laptop, half expecting to find nothing usable, and instead finding a more complete record than I could have deliberately built if I'd been trying. I had every single draft file, saved with the same obsessive version numbering habit I'd used on every writing project in my adult life, each one time-stamped by my own computer months, sometimes over a year, before the version Julian eventually submitted to publishers. I had an entire email thread, over 200 messages long, spanning those 8 months, showing him sending me his original 60 pages, me sending back chapters, him responding with notes, me incorporating them, a complete, dated, granular record of exactly who had written what, and when, months before any agent or publisher ever saw a finished manuscript. I had, most damningly, an early full draft I'd sent him with a specific structural choice, a mid-book flashback structure he'd initially hated and asked me to cut, that had, in the final published version, been restored almost word for word, meaning the published book's actual structure matched my original draft more closely than it matched any version Julian had ever personally revised. I remember staring at that particular comparison for a long time, feeling something click into place. The strange, specific proof that even his own attempts to make the book his had, in the end, quietly drifted back toward what I'd actually written. I brought all of it to an intellectual property attorney, a careful, unhurried man named Mr. Castellano, who told me, in our first meeting, that ghostwriting disputes without a contract were notoriously difficult to litigate, but that the sheer volume and specificity of what I'd accidentally preserved gave me a real, unusually strong case for something most people in my position never managed to assemble. Most people in your situation, he told me, sliding my own folder back across his desk, have a strong feeling and nothing else. You have a paper trail most litigators would consider a gift. He brought in a forensic linguist, a field I genuinely hadn't known existed until that meeting, who compared the published novel's prose against a sample of my own previous unpublished writing and Julian's own earlier, published short fiction from years before. Her report, delivered 6 weeks later, was almost uncomfortably precise. Statistical analysis of sentence rhythm, word choice patterns, and specific stylistic habits showed the published novel's prose matching my own writing samples far more closely than it matched anything Julian had written under his own name before or since. I did not sue him in the end, though I want to be honest that I came close, and that the case, according to Mr. Castellano, likely would have succeeded. What I did instead, once we had the full case assembled, was send Julian's own attorney the entire file, the drafts, the email trail, the forensic linguistic report, with a single letter proposing a private settlement rather than a public lawsuit that would have dragged both our names and the book's reputation through a very public, very ugly fight. Julian's team, once they'd actually seen the volume of what I had, moved fast. Within 3 weeks, we'd reached a private settlement, a retroactive payment reflecting a fair share of the book's earnings to date, an ongoing percentage of future royalties and any film proceeds, and a small, quiet, contractually required acknowledgement. Not a public confession, nothing that would embarrass him in the press. Simply a legal document establishing me as co-author of record for all future editions and any adaptation. Julian and I have not spoken since the settlement was finalized. I understand, from mutual friends, that he's told a version of the story in which a former collaborator pursued an aggressive legal claim that he settled to move on with his life. A sentence that manages to be technically true while erasing almost everything that actually happened. I don't feel a strong need to correct that story loudly. The legal record now says something the magazine profiles never will. And for me, that turned out to matter more than winning an argument in public. It's raining tonight, the same steady rain that was falling the evening, over a year ago now, that I sat at my own kitchen table reading a magazine profile that erased 8 months of my life in a single first-person paragraph. I still write, mostly for myself now, mostly things with my own name attached from the very first draft, and I've noticed, with a kind of quiet relief, that I don't dread opening those files the way I sometimes caught myself dreading his revisions back when I still believed we were building something together. I've learned, the expensive way, that a handshake is a beautiful thing between two people who actually mean it, and a completely useless thing the moment one of them stops. I don't think Julian set out, that night in his kitchen, to eventually erase me. I think success did something to him that fear and struggle never had, and that somewhere in the specific, intoxicating rush of his first real bestseller, it became easier to simply believe his own new story than to keep sharing credit for the old one. I understand that, in the abstract, the way you can understand a lot of things about a person you love for 15 years without it making what they did to you hurt any less. I still, on certain nights, catch myself missing the version of him from those 8 months. The grateful, humbled, half-broken friend I actually wrote that book with, before the finished thing existed to be jealous of its own origin story. My name is on that book now, quietly, in every future printing, exactly the way it should have been from the very first one. I didn't get that by being right, in the end, in some abstract moral sense. Plenty of people are right and still lose. I got it by being, without ever meaning to be, extremely, obsessively organized about my own work, months and months before I ever had a single reason to think I need to prove any of it. If there's one thing I want another writer, or honestly anyone doing a real favor for someone they love, to take from this. It's simply that keeping your own careful record of your own work was never really about distrust. It turned out to be the only thing standing between me and a story where I never existed at all.